see are on the screen, and Jade Lynn is prop 1. Kevin Yang, prop 2. Matt Glasspool. Opposition 1, and Olivia Railton. Right, so that everyone can hear it. This House believes that they'll break unjust laws. This House would break unjust laws. And it's over to you people. Proposition 1 will speak for 6 minutes, with a bell at 1 minute, 5 minutes, and 6 minutes. And the 1 minute either side is protected time. During the 1 minute to 5 minutes, points of information may be asked. I now call to the podium. Jade Lynn.
A 16-year-old girl is raped. When she reports the misery of seeing her abuser every day, the trauma of her experiences, and the endless, cruel practices of offshore detention to her doctor, they do nothing. It's the dystopia of Manus Island. Doctors in Australia report the mistreatment of children in their care, but until recently, they couldn't do the same for that girl or for any other vulnerable refugee. The Border Force Act threatened 2 years in jail for any doctor who spoke out for national security purposes. But those doctors breaking laws in protests allowed us to see what really occurred in Manus Island, but also were able to change that law, cause the repeal of that law. Australia is the land of the free, but only through the breaking of unjust laws. This House is defined as citizens of a country, and breaking unjust laws simply as doing something that is illegal. My allocation today, firstly, I will tell you why this is a reasonable form of protest. Secondly, what practical outcomes it achieves. My second speaker will tell you about the principled argument for breaking these laws, and also about the global context. So on to my first piece of substantive, why this is a reasonable form of protest. In every country, unjust laws exist, but they particularly target minorities. That is to say that morality shifts over time, and laws have a difficulty in catching up to that morality. That looks like movements such as the gay rights movement or the multicultural movement. But still, across the world, laws prohibit women from doing the same things that men can do, that refugees in Australia are still not protected. Such injustices must be changed, and we think the only way to do so is through breaking those laws. When racist, sexist laws exist, we must do something. The structural prohibitions that stop them from doing something like writing a petition include the fact that these groups often have a lack of political voice. That 16-year-old girl on Manus Island couldn't contact the Prime Minister and ask him for something to change. The only way for those doctors to help was to break those laws. That one voice wasn't enough, but first I'll take a point.
Ma'am, how do breaking unjust laws actively increase the political capital of those who are marginalized and oppressed?
Absolutely. So this is on my second issue of practical outcomes, but I'm happy to go there now if you like. So we think that in democracies, if lots of people are breaking laws, that means that lots of people see these things happening, that is through the media, and that causes more protesting and a bigger voice for those people, because other people who are empowered and have some political voice barrack around them. They see the injustice and they do something about it. And when it becomes hard to keep order, when the government feels its power slipping, something changes. That means that democracies are expressed not just in vote, but in action. But secondly, and importantly, in non-democracies, this is about people will go missing or go dead from breaking laws in these countries. We think that this is an outcome and a very horrible consequence. But these sorts of things pick up Western media attention. It looks like Julie Bishop going to the Chinese government and publicly declaring their stance on disappearing prisoners, political prisoners in the Chinese system. It looks like Western diplomacy getting better outcomes for the people of those countries and stopping such atrocities from occurring. We think that those diplomatic pressures mean that the long term must be prioritized over the short term, because life without liberty for centuries to come is not something we stand for on Team Proposition. But back to my case. Under these structural prohibitions, we think that there are two other questions. One, we think it is just. We think that if your rights are not upheld and you break those laws, that is an okay and very moral thing for you to do. But secondly, and no thank you, it provides media traction, which was what I was just talking about. Often laws are made quietly, hundreds are passed every year, and the media and the people find it very difficult to keep up with the rapid pace, and so things slip through the cracks. But we also think that there are archaic laws that still exist that we don't know about. Section 25 of the Australian Constitution allows states to stop races from voting. That is something that very few people in this room would know. We think that that is analogous to every other racist, sexist law that still stands in modern democracies. We think that those are really terrible things and that they should be changed. We also think that in order for people to change these laws, no thank you, you have to provide media attention. We think breaking those laws, those people experiencing those consequences, allows for that to occur. But back to my practical outcomes, we think it's important to note that it's not just anarchists breaking laws. It looks like NGOs going to countries and ignoring their unjust laws in order to provide aid to the people, to report what is actually going on in those countries. We think that that is a similar situation to what we support. But we also think that the media allows the empowered to express political voice and pressure governments into actually changing their actions. Because when no one challenges a government, when people obey those laws, nothing changes, and that's not something we stand for. But finally, under this point, we think that punishment still exists for individuals. That means when someone thinks a law is unjust, if nobody else also thinks it's unjust, then nothing changes. It doesn't mean that we go into a state of anarchy. It means that when people support the breaking of these laws, when the punishments are dealt with, then you actually get change for the right moral causes we were so proud to propose.
Please welcome opposition speaker.
Let me tell you why side proposition has lost this debate. They have lost this debate because they live in an idealistic world where everything just goes handy-dandy and just the government consumes the people and does as they wish. We as side opposition are going to win this debate because we take cognizance of the fact that when a government is oppressive, it is going to continue to do that. It is going to continue to act in such a manner, and by breaking unjust laws, you therefore further detriment those who are already marginalized, and that is not something we are willing to support, right? Now, before I get onto my positive matter, where I'll be speaking about the subjectivity of unjust laws and how legislation actually affects active discourse within a nation, let's look at why strategically the side has lost today's debate. They've lost today's debate because they haven't characterized unjust laws at all, right? They've simply come up here and said that unjust laws are bad and therefore they should be stopped. But later on in my analysis, I'm going to be showing you that unjust laws actually exist on a wide subjective spectrum, and therefore it's not something we're willing to support, right? But let's deal with some of the analysis that we saw out of the first problem, okay? First, the most important analysis was made was what is the best way to get change, okay? Firstly, it was that we allow people to see the injustice. Two responses. First response is we see that you just assume that people are ignorant within a country, right? You assume that when apartheid was happening in South Africa, white individuals didn't know that black people were being oppressed. They knew this, but the thing was the majority of white people supported this legislation and therefore did nothing about it, right? So highlighting this doesn't make any sort of a difference. And secondly, even if it was highlighted and you were somehow marginal, like highlighting it to people who supported it, we would say that this just means that they had an entrenched idea of wanting to support it and would do it anyway without any sort of like faction needing to be done, okay? Second level of analysis that they provided was this idea that we challenge the government, okay? And this is going to be coming up largely in Olivia's speech, where she tells you about practicality and the effective means of actually getting change. But what we tell you in like one level response is that more often than not, what is going to happen is that the people are actively going to be targeted for doing such an act, right? We think this therefore means that if it ensures that for another 40, 50 years, the government is able to legitimize their stance to a widely racist rhetoric, we therefore think it's unjust, okay? We don't think it's something we're willing to support. Okay, so before I get onto my idea of like subjectivity, let's go.
Okay, so you talked about the idea of countries with democracies, we can largely see the things that are going on. What are countries, authoritarian states like North Korea and China, that actively prevent the spread of information in the media with laws?
Okay, so if people are censoring things within the media, we therefore say that breaking laws isn't going to change it because the media is just not going to show it, right? This doesn't make any logical sense. Moreover, we say that you simply cannot say that people living within North Korea are ignorant just because like the newspaper publishes what Kim Jong-un wants, okay? You don't actively take cognizance of the fact of the way that people actively think within these countries, okay? So let's move on to my first level of analysis, this whole idea of the subjectivity. And my conclusion here is that because of the subjectivity of the notion that they're willing to support, we cannot support it because we think it's detrimental, okay? So let's give you an example. We say that the example of unjust laws, because of a lack of characterization by the side, is one that exists on an extremely wide spectrum. We therefore say that yes, while it is largely agreeable that oppressing gay rights in Russia is not a really good thing, they therefore also have to like contend and agree with the fact that a very conservative white male in Texas feels that it is unjust that he cannot speak out and say the N-word and use hate speech, right? Because this is something he deems to be unjust. This is something that he thinks should be a constitutional right, okay? So because of the subjective nature of unjust laws, we think that two things happen. First thing that happens is we think that people just go around and actively break laws, right? We think that when you give people the power to determine what is unjust, because we don't think that like injustice exists on an objective level, specifically within racist rhetoric societies, because these are the people who are holding the things that you deem to be objectively unjust, right? We therefore think that when you allow these people just to actively break laws because they think there's something that they're willing to do, you further disenfranchise the marginalized groups within these societies, right? We think that giving the people with the power more power to make decisions and actively influence their racist rhetoric and stuff like that is not something we're willing to support. Second level of analysis here is that we think it sets a very negative precedent. We think that in the instance at which some like objectively unjust law is changed, because of the precedent that you've said that because I deem it to be unjust, I can therefore break it, you actively just go, it's counterintuitive to say that we're going to do this, right? Because then you say that even when the law is justified as they would have you believe, we just allow for people to break it and allow for them to continue to act in a racist manner, in a manner that is not like beneficial to anyone, right? We think that this is extremely harmful, okay? So what have I told you? I've told you that because of the fact that subjectivity is one that exists within the legislation and is one that exists like primarily within like a societal sense, we're not willing to support this idea, okay? Second level of analysis, and my second issue for today's debate, is the way that like legislation affects discourse, okay? My conclusion here is that legislation actively affects the way that people think in society, and because of this, we should take cognizance of how we treat it. Two levels of analysis. Firstly, yes, we're standing at witness, and it's all cool to say that we're nice and liberal people, but not everyone is. Not everyone has the ability to question the government. The majority of individuals take the government's word as true, and therefore support notions that are passed, okay? We therefore then say that when the government is passing laws that actively discriminate against people, not just because people are intrinsically racist, they support it because that's just the societal norm, okay? Therefore, we say that the best way for people to change the sort of rhetoric is for the government to actively change the law on an organic basis. Because one, we think you then allow for like a substantive access to human rights for these people, and moreover, you allow for organic change within the rhetoric of people. If you actively care about changing those who are marginalized and oppressed, you stand inside opposition. Very proud of you.
debaters with 1 minute protected time either side.
On Team Government, we believe that all humans are born equal, regardless of where they may live, regardless of where the laws may apply, regardless of who they are. Moldova, Russia, Uganda are just some of the countries that allow the stoning of gay people simply for being who they are, that allow discrimination on a basis that affects every facet of society simply for something that they cannot change. The opposition team has told you that in this debate, we are the ones being idealistic. However, we say that we are actually more realistic. We can come up with concrete examples of what actually happened in the past, and we believe that since we can provide an empirical analysis of what change and how change actually occurs, we believe that you'll actually side with side government. Now first, moving on to two extensions, mainly on the mechanisms of change and also on the global aspect of this, which will also have some interwoven rebuttals on their side. Firstly, on the topic of how change happens and the idea of the legitimacy of a government. They try to paint this picture of an anarchic place where everyone can break any law they want. However, they fail to see that a government is not just simply for being a government. A government derives its power and legitimacy from the willingness of the people to subject to laws and the power of the government. Therefore, we believe change is created best when governments are created that are due to the legitimacy of the people. So we believe that simply the act of not following a law is preventing the legitimacy of a government, which we believe especially applies to authoritarian governments. Now let me provide some of these empirical analysis that I was talking about earlier. Let's talk about the basis of democracies. Let's talk about Myanmar, for example. The reason Aung San Suu Kyi was able to become a large leader, a prime minister of Myanmar now, was not because she followed the laws, it's not because she prevented censorship, it's because she actively spoke out against things she believed were unjust. In these places, in instances in every country in the world, in Australia, in the United States, we see that the basis for democracy is revolution and protest. The basis for democracy is not silence. Silence is not conducive to debate. Debate is not democracy. Debate is what the democracy is based on. Something that we can all agree on today. Let me talk about the civil rights movement. Individuals have the right to decide what is just because they are the ones that can create change. So let me talk about the mechanism that I would like to talk about today, which is that just movements are based on the hearts and minds of people. We believe that a white conservative discriminating against a group of people would not be able to gain the hearts and minds required to create change. Look at the civil rights movement. The reason that Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, the March on Montgomery, all these examples of change are able to be created is because they said they were the the example of places when they drew attention to discrimination, drew attention to the hearts and minds of more people, and thereby were able to create change. So if you actually look at the history of how democracies are formed, the history of how changing democracies are formed, we see that actually it's besides government in which we can create protest movements that actually derive from the largest legitimacy of protest movements and civil society in general.
Kevin, by this analysis, do you concede to the fact that legislation in the way that is enacted and enforced by the people is one that is completely subjective upon their internal biases?
Actually, this is actually a wonderful point, because I'll just talk about that. Legislation is affecting every aspect of society, and that's exactly the reason, because legislation is subjective, is the reason why we believe there are unjust laws in the world. There's no country that's perfect, there's no law that's perfect, which is why we believe that unjust laws must be broken. So if we're talking about the idea of legislation that is illegitimate, legislation that's subjective to the area in which it comes from, such as, for example, Moldova, Uganda, Russia, these are examples of places where they can break these laws. And the most important part is, the reason we have to define what is unjust or just is because we as the government team cannot decide for every country, every person, in every world that exists, what is unjust and what is just. That is why we believe that the mechanism that already exists within creating change, that if these people are able to get the hearts and minds of the people that want to change, then they will be able to create a protest movement that can actually create change. So it's not just one person breaking a law, not one criminal stealing something from a store. It's not just from one person breaking a law that may actually be discrimination to other people, that actually create this kind of change on a larger societal basis. Yeah.
So by this analysis, you concede to the fact that if a law was able to be changed through like a meaningful legal protest, you would support that willingly?
Yes, because that's the basis upon which all democracies rely on. Now, let me just talk about the idea he talked about the idea of government changing laws organically, and I actually like to point out a flaw in that argument. Firstly, we talked a lot about authoritarian governments, and authoritarian governments simply don't change their laws organically. The point of their power is to stay in power. Therefore, we cannot expect countries in which they need these kind of protests the most to actually have change that would result from organically changing legislation. Again, these legislations are subjective to where they come from. This legislation is not equal to the people and minorities that are most targeted. So we believe that, again, we cannot wait for organic change, because in history, I challenge you to provide one example of when staying silent actually helped us. Now let's go to the idea of a global presence and how we can talk about authoritarian needs in general. So let's talk about the idea of the boomerang effect. The boomerang effect is basically the idea that media does not simply exist within one country as they would like us to believe. The reason that we're able to find out about chemical weapon attacks in Syria is not because the state media is the one reporting on this, it's because of NGOs like Human Rights Watch that go in there breaking laws of Syria to allow us to learn about these chemical weapon attacks. So therefore we see that these kind of authoritarian governments in which we need to create change, their analysis on the media is actually completely false. Let's take a look at Hong Kong, for example. The reason that the pro-independence movement actually has been able to gain media attention is because media companies like the BBC or, for example, CNN were able to report on these, not simply Chinese media that would not report on in the first place. Again, they don't understand how authoritarian governments work or how they want to create change in the first place. Now let's go down to their case and some of the rebuttals they provided. They told us that, again, there is no central idea of what legitimacy is, and that we can crack down based on simply what we want to do. And that they think that by breaking laws and cracking down on certain groups of people, that will increase the legitimacy of these authoritarian governments. Again, we believe that this action of cracking down on people that are protesting actually works in our favor, works in favor of those paying protest movements. If you look at the example of the March on Montgomery during the Civil Rights Revolution in America, the reason they're able to get the hearts and minds of the people, get the heart and mind of the president, John F. Kennedy in fact, was because the people on television saw the results of people being beaten by police members, being sent to jail for simply protesting. Okay, so this is the example in which we say that authoritarian governments, their legitimacy is weakened by the fact that they are cracking down on people. So again, if they say that they can get more legitimacy by cracking down on people, I again invite them to provide any empirical analysis on when this has actually occurred. I believe they're living in an idealistic world simply because they have failed to do this, in fact, their entire speech. Now let's talk about the idea, finally, of punishment and subjectivity. So they talked about this anarchic world in which someone that we believe is racist or doing something wrong can break the law, and then therefore the legitimacy sets a bad precedent in general. Now let's just say that, again, the model is on our government team that punishment still exists. We don't simply say that because it's an unjust law, some arbiter would come in and say, okay, you don't have to go to jail for this. That's not true. If you look at what's happened in the past, again, these protesters, for example, in the Civil Rights Movement, were jailed. That means, again, if they're not able to get the hearts and minds of the people and start a protest movement, and that therefore they would get this punishment and be sent to jail. So if someone were to use a racist attack on someone in a place where discrimination laws are in place, they would still go to jail, they'll still get their due process, they'll still get a trial. This does not change any of that. And I'd like to invite you to think about how within the status quo, everything that they say is already possible. Criminals may already be saying that laws are unjust, but that doesn't mean that these criminals are starting anarchic movements in every democracy in the world. Think about what's happening in the world today. Think about the world you want to see in, and you'll see that you want to side on government. Now, what have I done for you today? Firstly, I provide you empirical analysis, evidence of how democratic revolutions happen, how protest movements work. Secondly, I've given you a mechanism on how this changes through getting the hearts and minds of people, something that does not apply to racist and xenophobic attacks in general. And also, I've given you the analysis on the idea of authoritarian needs. Hey, here you go. Yeah? Okay. So, finally, on the idea of the difference between idealism and realism, we like to say that we provide multiple examples of countries that currently have human rights violations, and we believe that since there is no universal basis for deciding what is true, what is false, this falls down to the individual. And again, I talked about the idea of how government cannot organically change laws in authoritarian states, in which we believe are the most important acts of today's debate. In fact, we're deciding on changing democracies and spreading human rights. And that's exactly why I'm very proud to sign a proposition where we side with democracy, protest, debate, and human rights. Thank you.
We now call the seconder to the opposition, Olivia.
Madam Speaker, we've continuously heard from an incredibly naive side government today that has came to you and told you that their bill only helps people, that they're only protecting minorities that are oppressed under the status quo. But what we would tell you is that it is their bill that allows racists to make incredibly rude and incriminating remarks, that allows homophobic people to continue to oppress those that they disagree with. Madam Speaker, we do not support discrimination, and for that reason, we are so proud to oppose. Okay, so as your second speaker on side opposition, I'm going to be doing three main things for the House today. First, I'm going to be presenting side op's final contention, then I'm going to be going to a thorough refutation of everything we heard out of side gov, and finally, I'm going to be proving to you, Madam Speaker, why we have in fact already won today's debate. So my partner came up here and talked to you about the subjectivity of law and why that inherently completely ruins their case in the first place. But I'm going to be talking about the practical harms and what happens when you implement a bill and allow people to break whatever laws they deem to be unjust. Now, they talked a lot about oppressed people. Let's contend with this. Now, if you have people that are oppressed that actively want change, right? We would say that when you break the laws of a government that already doesn't respect you, you actively make things worse for yourself. Now, what's an example of this happening? They wanted one. When you look at the defiance movement in South Africa during the 1950s, 1960s, and you have the black people in South Africa being oppressed by the apartheid government, you have them going out breaking laws that are discriminatory. They go out, they sit on white benches, they refuse to carry ID. Right? Now, what was the result of this? Not the ending of apartheid, that didn't happen for another 35 years. What happened was jails grew, police presence increased, and more blood flowed through the streets because people didn't get to work with their government. The government continued to disrespect them. How you gain respect from an oppressive government is to go, hi, we're legitimate people, we disagree with you, but we're going to protest legally, because legal protest is allowed in the majority of places. But now let's analyze this, right? What happens when dissent just isn't allowed in places like North Korea? Well, you have North Korea being blacklisted by basically the entire international community. You have trade sanctions, you have trade embargoes, and you have them being excluded from the United Nations where they only have observer status. That's how you get active change. You allow functioning countries that care about human rights to come in and go, hi, these people matter. We think that's how you get change, not breaking laws that you deem to be, subjectively unjust. Beyond this, they brought up the idea of segregation in the United States, right? They said, no, it was, Rosa Parks sitting on the back of the bus that solved this problem, and they mistakenly believed that it was JFK that was president at this time, like whatever. But beyond this, what ended segregation in Alabama was a government-sanctioned protest when the government of Selma said, you know what, we're going to allow you guys to organize yourselves and voice your opinions and allow you to dissent. What happened was, because the government believed in the people, because they worked with the oppressed class and the oppressed people, more people came out to protest, and President Lyndon Johnson saw what was happening and said, you know what, something needs to change in the United States. That's how you get change, when you have the government and the people working together. Sure, I'll take one of you.
So during the March on November, you're saying that people weren't attacked by police for something that the police thought they were doing was unjust and not founded in law.
Okay, sure, that happened, but beyond that, we would say that under your side of the house, someone who was racist in Alabama at that time would be able to attack a black person because, they believed that the law against discrimination and laws against violence were unjust. You can't simply cherry pick examples on your side where minorities are oppressed. On your side of the house, you have to fight for the belief in people, who want to make racist remarks, who want to attack people that are currently protected by law because of, their rights and their opinions on the law. You can't simply cherry pick examples where only minorities are targeted. You failed to do this throughout your entire case. Okay, now on to some refutation. Now, the main thing that came up was that, unjust laws target minorities. The first speaker talked about this. Once again, my brilliant partner Matt came up here and discussed with you the idea of the subjectivity of injustice, right? Now, these are the laws that she deems to be unjust. If you're someone who believes, you should be able to punch people in the face that you disagree with, I would disagree with you, okay? But under their side of the house, you have the ability to break that law if you deem it to be unjust. But, we think that that's kind of an inherent flaw in their case. They should have defined injustice. But beyond this, they believe that the protest that comes with, publicized protests of breaking of unjust laws, more people buy into it, right? Because more people get to view this. Now, the second speaker actively knifed the first speaker when he said, okay, but in some countries, dissent isn't publicized. But beyond this, we think that if anything, when you have the publicized breaking of laws, we say that people push further away from the movement. You get confirmation bias, right? When you have Matt gave analysis with regards to this. When you have the majority of people in South Africa that are white being racist while the apartheid government was in power, and the apartheid government, promotes laws that are inherently racist, and then you see a bunch of black people committing crimes, breaking these laws, we see that what that does is just allow these white people more justification for their racism. We don't want that. We want a situation where these people are respected, where they're working in line with the government, and that is not what they're advocating for on their side of the house, but what we're giving you on our side. Now beyond that, they said that when governments feel like their power is slipping, things change. Yeah, we agree with you, but they change for the worse, right? When governments feel, especially authoritarian ones, that they're losing grip of their power, of their oppressive hold on their people, then they're more likely to take radical action and increase police presence, increase violence, in order to control dissent. Tell me how I'm wrong.
How are you able to change the situations in those countries if nothing changes internally and it just looks like Western pressure?
Okay, so when we look at situations like what's happening in, for example, Syria, where it's not actively just Western countries, but entire united coalitions such as the UN, such as NATO, and you have countries like Jordan also wanting to help with refugees, also wanting to help intervene, we see that then it doesn't just look like Western pressure, we see that it looks like the entire world is looking at that country, recognizing that the people are oppressed, and for that reason, they're under an incredible amount of pressure. We think that Syria is kind of like a power vacuum example. We continue to see them cherry-picking examples that suit them, defend the racist remarks of an Alabama conservative to me, and then maybe I'll listen to you. But beyond this, no thank you. They say that governments are legitimized when they support the beliefs of the majority of their people. Under their side of the house, they would believe in the legitimacy of the apartheid government, of the American segregation movement, because the majority of the people at that time that had the ability to vote were inherently racist. You can't make comments like that but then defend the rights of minorities. We see this inherent clash between views and values on their side of the house. Deal with this, please, in your reply speech. Beyond this, they said that democracy is not based on silence. I thought that was a really nice rhetoric line, right? Now, why do you characterize the breaking of the law as the only form of protest? Matt and I both gave you analysis as to how, one, legal positive protest actually inherently gives you more actively positive change. But beyond that, how there's many other mechanisms to have change ensue, like working with the government, other than peaceful protests. But when you have the majority of governments around the world working in coalition to help each other, we think that that's actively when you kill oppression, not when you allow the oppressors to justify their beliefs with the breaking of laws. Now, let's end with this. They said that the law is completely subjective. Well, we said that injustice is completely subjective. Now, if they say that the law is subjective, yet advocate for the breaking of laws that people deem to find unjust, then on their side of the house, law is kind of irrelevant in the first place, right? If law is subjective and people can interpret it in any way that they want, no thank you, it's protected time. If people can interpret it in any way that they want to, then why have any laws at all if anyone can just go around and go, oh, I don't like this, it messes with my values, so I'm just going to disagree with it. On their side of the house, they advocate for an anarchic world where people are able to be discriminatory, where violence is justified based on whether or not you think it is, and we don't want that on-side opposition. Now, what have we brought to you today? Matt came up here and gave you a brilliant analysis as to why the idea of injustice is incredibly subjective, and for that reason, we can't buy into their bill. I came up and discussed with you the practical harms associated with the bill Gov has presented, their inherent case contradiction, their second speaker basically knifing their first, and the suggestion that law is completely subjective. Madam Speaker, we don't advocate for a world of violence. We advocate for a world of democracy, of democratic belief, of the belief that people should be protected under all circumstances. The reasons they have failed to state, we are so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Teams now have 1 minute to prepare their final summation. Speaker for the opposition.
So let's look at why, before we even deal with any of their analysis in today's debate, why their case already doesn't stand, right? It's because their second speaker comes up today and concedes to the fact that laws are completely subjective. He concedes to the fact that the way people interpret and enact the legislation of a country is subjective to that individual. They then fail to provide you analysis that supports the fact that yes, people are oppressed, but at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, you therefore justify and are able to legitimize the fact that some people will just act in a racist, rhetoric way because of the fact that they deem that law to be unjust, right? You can't simply say that yes, it's very bad to oppress gay people, but then completely ignore the fact that your case actively legitimizes the racist rhetoric being propagated amongst society, right? We therefore say that because they haven't been able to provide any sort of analysis as to what an actual unjust law is, they concede to the fact that it's subjective. Because they concede to the fact that it's subjective, they concede to our analysis, they've already lost today's debate, right? Two questions that needed to be answered. First one, how do we best get active change in oppressed, marginalized society? Second question, what is best for the oppressed and marginalized, right? I'm going to show you why our case is strongest throughout, okay? So first, the first question, how do we best get change, right? The only level of analysis that they seem to have is that the government sees the injustice and the government is being challenged, and therefore things change, right? Few responses. First response, they completely ignored my analysis where I told you how legislation actively affects mindsets, how people buy into a government, and therefore when the law doesn't change, people just break it. It doesn't change the way that these people view things. It doesn't lead to organic change, right? Secondly, Olivia has told you that the best way to actively get change for these people is through working within the system in coalitions, right? Because then you actively subvert the adverse harms that I'll be talking about later. We think that this is a better mechanism by which we get active change, and we think that because they haven't been able to contend with any of our analysis and we've shown theirs hasn't fall, theirs doesn't stand, we think we get best change on our side by working within the system, right? Second question, what is best for the oppressed and marginalized within these societies, okay? The only analysis that they seem to have is that things just exist on an absolute, that because the people challenge the laws and that, things just change and bad things don't happen, right? This is unrealistic, and this is ignoring all of the analysis that we provided to you. Because Olivia and I have told you throughout our case that actual harms exist when you break the law. What happened in South Africa was the government didn't go, oh shame, these poor black people are breaking the laws, let's help them. They said, God damn it, these black people are breaking the laws, let's make it worse for them, let's make sure that we show who our power is, let's actually legitimize ourselves. That's what happened. Also, they fail to ignore the fact that change doesn't just happen on a legislative basis. We've told you that in order to get organic change, you change the mindsets of the individuals within that society. To do that, you don't actively break laws that leads to confirmation bias and racists saying, look, this is why they act this way, this is why we need to treat them this way. If you care about change, if you care about actively helping those who are marginalized and oppressed, you stand beside opposition. Thank you.
If the government creates laws that prohibit your ability to protest, then the opposition had nothing to stand on. Because your oppression was not clear, your change could not come because Western governments couldn't even see any oppression occurring because you abided by those laws, you let them suppress you. They told us that we were cherry-picking example. They used government-sanctioned protests as an example. Two questions in this debate. One, is this an effective means of getting change? Two, is this for racists or for other people? One, they told you that people will be targeted. I already answered a POI about this as to why this was a good thing, why this created change and radical change was needed. The only reason for Western governments to do anything was when people broke unjust laws and were punished unjustly. But then secondly, they told you that it was just ignorance. We think that overseas people, as in Western governments and populations, don't know that much about a lot of oppression in the world. We thought that was an important stakeholder. But also, we think that laws actively to magically change. They couldn't point to a single example. We also think that they had no mechanism, and that was why we won this debate, because we gave something to those oppressed people instead of telling them to sit quietly and wait for a while for something else to happen for them. Okay, second question for this debate. Was this for racists or was this for other people? This was probably important. Firstly, they told you about negative precedent. We think that this debate is that this House would. That is, we think we would stand principally for it. But additionally, they said that no one will listen to the new law. We think, sure, they don't have to have gay sex if they don't want to. But we think that this debate was a lot about moral wrongs and laws about that. But additionally, we think that they will get punished if they do something wrong. That was something they fundamentally missed. If you were racist and you punched a black person in the face just because they were black, you would get punished, like, to the maximum extent. There was no political capital for you to do that. But we also think that this, my second speaker told you about all the examples. We think that when rednecks break anti-racism laws, they're going to get mocked. But also, why does this not benefit racists? They already have the power. They made the laws. This is everybody else rejecting those laws. We think